the crash and the Guardian, Marcus Reed, had always prided himself on being prepared for anything. 20 years of deep space exploration had taught him that the universe loved throwing curveballs at overconfident humans. But as his ship, the Pathfinder, screamed through the atmosphere of Kepler 42b with half its systems failing, he realized that some curveballs were bigger than others. The crash landing was brutal. Marcus felt every bone in his body jar as the ship carved a smoking trench through the alien landscape before coming to rest against a cluster of crystalline formations. Emergency lights bathed the cockpit in red, and the acrid smell of burning. Electronics filled his nostrils. He took inventory of his injuries through gritted teeth, probably a couple of cracked ribs, a gash on his forehead that was bleeding more than he liked, and a shoulder that screamed every time he moved it. The planet outside looked hostile. Through the cracked view screen, Marcus could see a landscape of purple vegetation and towering spires of what looked like natural glass. The air reading showed it was breathable, but barely. High humidity, elevated oxygen levels, and traces of compounds his computer couldn't identify. The temperature was a sweltering 42 degrees Celsius, and that was in the shade. Marcus managed to extract himself from the pilot's seat and began the grim task of assessing his situation. The ship's main power core was dead, taking life. Support with it. The emergency beacon was transmitting, but the nearest human outpost was 6 months away, even at maximum warp. His food supplies would last maybe 2 weeks if he was careful. Water was a bigger problem. The ship's recycling system was offline, and he had perhaps 3 days of emergency rations. He spent the first day trying to repair the beacon, hoping to boost its signal strength. The work was slow and frustrating with his injured shoulder, but Marcus had learned long ago that staying busy was the best way to keep despair at bay. That evening, as the alien sun set in a blaze of colors that had no names in any human language, he made his first attempt to venture outside. The landscape was alien in every sense. The purple vegetation grew in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The crystalline formations hummed with a low frequency that he could feel. His bones, somewhere in the distance, something howled, a sound that was part animal, part machine, and entirely unsettling. Marcus was collecting samples of what he hoped was edible plant matter when he first saw her. She emerged from behind one of the crystal spires like a living shadow, and Marcus's first thought was that his eyes were playing tricks on him. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, with a humanoid torso that transitioned into a serpentine lower body. Her skin was covered in scales that shifted from deep emerald to brilliant gold, depending on how the light hit them. Her face was angular and alien, with large eyes that seemed to hold far too much intelligence. And when she opened her mouth, he could see rows of needle-sharp teeth. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Marcus slowly raised his hands, palms out, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The alien, he decided to think of her as female based on her elegant, graceful movements, tilted her head like a curious cat. Then she hissed. It wasn't a simple hiss of an angry snake. This was complex, layered, almost musical. Marcus realized with a start that she was speaking. The universal translator in his suit's systems was working overtime, but the closest it could manage was a rough approximation. Intruder danger leave territory now. Marcus took a careful step back and the alien's posture shifted. Her scales seemed to bristle and her tail coiled beneath her in a way that suggested she could strike with lightning speed. Marcus had encountered hostile aliens before, but never one that radiated such controlled menace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said aloud, knowing she couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intent. "My ship crashed. I need help." The alien's eyes narrowed, and she slithered closer. Marcus forced himself to remain still as she circled him, her movements fluid and hypnotic. She was studying him, he realized, taking in his alien appearance, with the same fascination he felt looking at her. When she reached out to touch his arm, Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. Her touch was gentle, but her skin was fever hot. She made a sound that the translator rendered as soft, weak, injured, small. It didn't sound like an insult, more like an observation. Marcus looked down at himself through her eyes. To her, he probably looked fragile. His skin was pale and soft compared to her scales. He was shorter than her, and his movements were clumsy compared to her serpentine grace. But humans had survived this long not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they were adaptable. Marcus, he said, pointing to himself. My name is Marcus. The alien tilted her head again, and after a moment, she made a sound that was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The translator couldn't parse it, but Marcus understood. It was her name. Lyra, he said, taking his best guess at the pronunciation. Your name is Lyra? Something changed in her expression. Surprise, perhaps. She repeated his name back to him, her voice wrapping around the unfamiliar syllables. Marcus? That was the beginning. Over the following days, Marcus learned that Lyra was as curious about him as he was about her. She would appear without warning, sometimes bringing food, fruits and roots that his scanner confirmed were safe for human consumption. She watched him work on his ship's systems with intense interest, occasionally making suggestions through gestures that proved surprisingly helpful. Lyra was intelligent. Marcus had known that from their first meeting, but as they spent more time together, he began to appreciate just how intelligent. She understood technology, even if it was different from her own. When Marcus was struggling to repair a damaged circuit, she showed him how to use the planet's crystalline formations to conduct electricity. When he was having trouble finding clean water, she led him to a hidden spring that bubbled up from deep underground in return. Marcus shared his own knowledge. He showed her how his tools worked, explained the basics of space travel through drawings in the sand, and taught her human words. She was a quick learner, picking up his language with startling speed, but there were still barriers between them. Marcus could see the wariness in her eyes, the way she would sometimes draw back when he moved too quickly. And he couldn't shake the feeling that she was protecting something, some secret she wasn't ready to share. The breakthrough came on the fourth day. Marcus was working on the ship's environmental systems when he heard Lyra's distress call. He rushed outside to find her trapped beneath a fallen crystal formation, her tail pinned and her scales cut in several places. Without thinking, Marcus grabbed a metal rod from his salvage pile and used it as a lever to lift the crystal. It took every ounce of strength he had, and his ribs screamed in protest. But he managed to shift it enough for Lyra to pull herself free. She was hurt, bleeding from a dozen cuts. And for the first time since he'd met her, she looked vulnerable. Marcus knelt beside her, pulling out his medical kit. Let me help, he said softly. When he reached out to clean the cuts on her arm, she flinched away. But then she saw the concern in his eyes, and slowly, she extended her arm toward him. Her scales were warm to the touch, and despite their reptilian appearance, they felt surprisingly soft. Marcus worked carefully, cleaning each cut and applying synthetic skin to help them heal. Lyra watched him work, her large eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she said something in her own language that the translator couldn't parse. But Marcus understood the meaning. Thank you. That night, for the first time, Lyra didn't disappear at sunset. She remained near the crashed ship, coiled in a loose spiral with her head raised, watching the alien stars. Marcus sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. Your people, Marcus said quietly. Where are they? Lyra was silent for a long moment. Then she pointed toward the horizon, where the crystal spires were tallest. Gone, she said heavily. Accent in English. Long time gone. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. All of them? All. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. I am ... last. Marcus stared at her, understanding flooding through him. She wasn't just protecting her territory. She was protecting the memory of her entire species. The last guardian of a dead civilization. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, Marcus saw something other than wariness in her eyes. He saw recognition. Here was another being who understood what it meant to be alone in the vastness of space. Not alone now, she said, and her tail moved to curl loosely around his waist. Not possessively, not aggressively, but protectively. You stay. I protect. Marcus looked up at the alien stars and felt something he hadn't experienced since the crash. Hope. Not just for rescue, but for something more. A connection that transcended species, planets, and the cold emptiness between the stars. He was no longer just a stranded human waiting for rescue. He was part of something new, something unprecedented in the history of both their species. And tomorrow he would begin to understand just how remarkable that truly was. Asterisk. Trust in the darkness the next morning brought new challenges and new understanding. Marcus woke to find Lyra already awake, her scales catching the early light as she watched the horizon with obvious concern. Something was wrong. What is it? Marcus asked, struggling to his feet. His ribs were feeling better, but the alien gravity still made every movement an effort. Hunters, Lyra said, her English improving daily. They come. Smell the fire. Smell the metal. She gestured toward his crash ship. Dangerous. Marcus had encountered the local wildlife during his salvage expeditions, mostly small, skittish creatures that fled at his approach. But he'd also seen signs of larger predators, claw marks on the crystal formations, bones scattered around what looked like feeding sites. What kind of hunters? Lyra's response was to show him her teeth and claws, then shake her head. Bigger. Meaner. They hunt in groups. Marcus felt his blood chill. Pack hunters were bad news on any world. How long do we have? Sundown, Lyra said, pointing to the horizon. Maybe less. Marcus spent the day working with frantic efficiency, salvaging everything useful from the ship while Lyra scouted their surroundings. They were too far from the crystal spires for her to lead him to whatever shelter her people had once used, and the ship itself was too damaged to provide adequate protection. But humans were good at improvising. Marcus had noticed that the local predators seemed to avoid the areas where certain crystalline formations hummed with electromagnetic energy. Using components from his ship's shield generators, he began constructing a perimeter of improvised force field emitters. It was crude work, but it might be enough to discourage animals that hunted by scent and sound. Lyra watched him work with growing fascination. You make barrier? She asked. Hopefully, Marcus replied, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the cooling evening air. These crystals generate some kind of electromagnetic field. If I can amplify it, He trailed off as Lyra suddenly appeared beside him, her movements so fluid he hadn't seen her approach. She studied his work for a moment, then began making adjustments to the crystal alignment with her claws. The humming grew stronger, more focused. How did you? Marcus began. By people, we know crystals, Lyra explained. We grow with them, learn from them. They are alive in a way you not understand. Marcus stared at her with new respect. Your people weren't just living here. You were part of the ecosystem. Yes, Lyra said simply, until the skyfire came. A skyfire? Marcus had been wondering what had happened to Lyra's people, but he hadn't wanted to pry. Now, as they worked together to create their defensive perimeter, she began to tell him the story. Long ago, we are many, she said, her voice taking on the cadence of an ancient tale. We live in harmony with crystals, with land, with all life. Then one day, fire falls from sky, not like your ship, bigger, brighter. It brings sickness, death. My people, we are strong, but not strong enough. One by one we fade. A plague, Marcus said grimly. Probably brought by a meteorite or some other space debris. I am young when it happens, Lyra continued. My family, they send me away too. The deep caves where crystals grow strongest. They say I must survive, must remember, when I finally come back. She gestured to the empty landscape around them. Marcus felt his throat tighten. How long have you been alone? Many seasons. Many years. Lyra's scales seemed to dim. I guard the sacred places, keep the memory alive, but memories, they are cold companions. As if to emphasize her words, The first howl echoed across the landscape. It was answered by another, and then another. The pack was gathering. Marcus and Lyra finished their preparations as the sun set. The electromagnetic barrier was crude but functional, creating a roughly circular safe zone around the crash site. Marcus had also rigged up some improvised weapons, energy cells that could be overloaded to create blinding flashes, and metal fragments that could be launched at high velocity, using compressed air from the ship's emergency systems. "Your people," Lyra said as they waited for the attack to begin. "They are clever. Make weapons from broken things." "We're good at making goo," Marcus replied. "It's how we survive long enough to reach the stars." The first attack came just after full darkness. Marcus saw them only as moving shadows at first. Large, low-slung creatures with too many legs and eyes that reflected the starlight. They moved with the coordinated precision of pack hunters, testing the perimeter, looking for weaknesses. One of them pressed against the electromagnetic barrier and recoiled with a sound like electronic feedback. The entire pack pulled back, circling the safe zone but not retreating. "They're smart," Marcus muttered. "They know we're trapped in here." "Yes," Lyra agreed. "They wait. Make us weak, make us tired. Then they come." It was going to be a long night. Marcus and Lyra took turns keeping watch, but neither of them really slept. The predators remained at the edge of the barrier, occasionally testing it with claws or teeth, learning its patterns. Marcus realized with growing dread that they were not just hungry. They were planning around midnight. The attacks began in earnest. The pack had discovered that while the electromagnetic barrier discouraged them, it didn't physically prevent them from crossing. The pain was apparently not enough to deter really determined predators. The first one that broke through was met by Marcus's improvised launcher. The metal fragment caught it in the shoulder, spinning it around with a shriek of pain and fury, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it began stalking them around the perimeter of their small safe zone. "They learn too fast," Lyra said grimly. "Next time, they come together." She was right. The next wave consisted of 3 creatures attacking simultaneously from different directions. Marcus managed to blind one with an overloaded energy cell, but the other 2 closed in fast. That was when Marcus learned what Lyra was truly capable of. She moved like liquid lightning, her serpentine body coiling and striking with precision that seemed impossible. Her claws found vital points on the first predator, dropping it in seconds. The second one tried to circle behind her, but her tail was already in motion, wrapping around its neck and lifting it off the ground. The creature was twice Marcus's size, but Lyra held it effortlessly. She said something in her own language that needed no translation, a warning, a promise, a declaration of intent. Then she threw the predator clear over the electromagnetic barrier with a casual flick of her tail. The remaining pack members retreated to reconsider their strategy. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice light despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Lyra looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "You are not prey," she said simply. "You are ... friend." The word hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. When was the last time someone had called him friend and meant it the way Lyra did? His life had been spent moving from assignment to assignment, planet to planet, always alone, always temporary. But here, on this hostile alien world, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. The pack made 2 more attempts during the night, but their coordination was breaking down. The electromagnetic barrier was working better than Marcus had hoped, and Lyra's presence was clearly unnerving them. By dawn, they had given up and moved on to easier prey. Marcus and Lyra sat together in the morning light, exhausted but victorious. The crisis had brought them closer, broken down the last barriers between them. They were no longer just 2 survivors sharing resources. They were partners. Asterisk. "Your barrier worked," Lyra said, examining the crystalline formations with obvious admiration. "My people, we never think to combine crystal power with sky metal, and I never would have known how to align the crystals properly," Marcus replied. "We make a good team. Yes, Lyra agreed. We do. Over the following days, their partnership deepened into something neither of them had expected. Marcus continued working on his ship, but now it was with Lyra's help. She showed him how to use the planet's unique resources in ways he never would have discovered alone. In return, he taught her about human technology, explaining concepts that bridged the gap between their two very different approaches to science. But more than that, they talked, really talked, about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Marcus learned that Lyra's people had been explorers too, in their own way. They had traveled to other worlds using technologies based on the same crystals that powered their civilization. They had encountered other species, traded knowledge, built alliances across the stars. We were peaceful, Lyra explained one evening, as they watched the alien sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. We believe all life is connected, all consciousness is sacred. Even when the sky fire came, we do not fight it. We accept it as part of the great pattern. Maybe that's why you survived, Marcus said thoughtfully. You adapted instead of fighting. Maybe, Lyra agreed. Or maybe I survived because I am meant to meet you. Marcus looked at her, surprised by the depth of emotion in her voice. You really believe that? I believe the universe has patterns we cannot see, Lyra said. Your ship crashes here, of all worlds. You find me, of all beings. We hope. Each other. Trust each other. This is not accident. Marcus wanted to argue, to point out that the universe was vast and random and that coincidences happened all the time. But looking at Lyra, seeing the peace in her eyes, he found he didn't want to. Maybe some things were too important to be left to chance. That night, as they had every night since the Predator attack, they slept close together. Lyra's natural body heat helped to regulate Marcus's temperature in the cool night air, while his presence seemed to calm her restless spirit. But tonight was different. Tonight, when Marcus woke in the early hours before dawn, he found Lyra's tail curled protectively around him, her head resting on his shoulder. She was so still he thought she was asleep, but then she spoke quietly. I dream of my people tonight. They are happy. They say I choose well. Choose what? Marcus asked softly. To trust, to hope, to believe that endings can be beginnings. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Lyra ... I know you must leave when rescue. Comies, she said. Your people need you. But until then, we have this. We have each other. Marcus looked up at the alien stars, thinking about rescue ships and human outposts and the life he'd left behind. All of it seemed distant now, less real. Then the weight of Lyra's head on his shoulder and the warmth of her coiled around him. What if I don't want to leave? He said quietly. Lyra raised her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Then we find new pattern, new way to be, together. Marcus reached out to touch her face, marveling at the softness of her scales. I never thought I'd find home on an alien world. Home is not place, Lyra said, leaning into his touch. Home is who you choose to be with. As the alien dawn broke over the crystal spires, Marcus realized that his rescue beacon had been silent for days. He could fix it, he knew. Could send out a signal that would bring human ships to this world. But looking at Lyra, seeing the future reflected in her eyes, he understood that some rescues weren't about being saved. Sometimes they were about being found. Sometimes they were about choosing to stay. The universe was vast and full of wonders. But the greatest wonder of all was lying curled around him, trusting him with her heart and her future. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Reed knew exactly where he belonged.